Good day, class. I am Dr. Adeyinka Gbadebo, your biology lecturer. You know, this is my YouTube channel. From time to time, I'll be bringing you simplifications on topics in biology, ecology, genetics. So please do feel free to subscribe to this channel, like this channel, and also share this channel and click the notification button. Click the notification button so that you can get updates on my lectures from time to time. So today in this lecture, I will be doing a subtopic in ecology called factors. Factors influencing environment and habitats. Factors influencing environment and habitats. That is the subtopic in ecology we'll be looking at today. You know, in our previous lectures, we have looked at the food chain, the food web, the trophic level. So in this lecture, we'll be looking at factors influencing environment and habitats. Factors influencing environment and habitat. Now, to start with, by means of introduction, what is environment? What is environment? We all live in an environment. Every organism lives in an environment. You cannot isolate an organism from its environment. Attempt to isolate an organism from its environment is a suicidal attempt. So every organism lives in a particular or in a specific environment that is suited or suitable for it to survive. So what is environment? Simply put, environment is the total surrounding of an organism. In other words, environment has to do with the physical, the chemical factors, and even the biological components that surrounds an organism. So, environment is actually the total physical, chemical, and the biological component, the biotic component that surrounds an organism that decide or determine its forms, and it also determines its survival. What is an habitat? An habitat, environment and habitat, sometimes they look very closely related, but they are interwoven, but there's a little difference between the environment of an organism and its habitat. If you are talking about habitat is the specific place where an organism lives in its environment. The specific place where an organism lives in its environment is its habitat. The specific place where an organism lives in its environment is its habitat. Okay, so if you are talking about habitat, it also encompasses both the physical, the chemical, and the biotic factors that affect the organism in that specific place that it lives. And you can also look at environment in terms of the specific place where a community, an ecological community, lives in their environment, and that includes the physical and the chemical and the biotic factors that surrounds them, that affect their survival in that particular place where they live. You can look at it this way: as a student, you live somewhere. The particular place where you live is your habitat. If on a street there are so many building on a street, but your particular location on that street, you live somewhere, your particular location on that street, okay, you live at number 20 Chrisland Street, Abeokuta. That particular location, that particular place where you live is your habitat. Your environment, your habitat is in your environment. Okay, your habitat is in your environment. So let's leave that is on the concept of environment and habitat. Now, coming back to the subtopic for today, which is factors influencing environment and habitat. Now, the factors influencing environment and habitat are basically or can be categorized into two broad factors, factors that influence environment and habitat. Okay, these factors are the biotic factors, and then number two is the abiotic factors, factors that affect an environment in its habitat, factors that affect an organism or community of organism in their habitat. There are two broad categories: the abiotic factors and the biotic factors. Now, what are the abiotic factors? The abiotic factors, simply put, they are the non-living factors that influence or affect an organism or a biotic community of organisms in their environment. So when you are talking about the non-living factors, you are talking about the abiotic factors. However, the biotic factors, they are the living components or the various interactions, the living components of the environment or the various interactions between the living components of the environment that affect the organism in its environment or in its habitat. They are the biotic components. So we'll start by elucidating the abiotic components, the abiotic components of the environment, the abiotic components of the environment. Now, for this lecture, I've categorized the abiotic components of the environment into five different categories. The abiotic components of the environment, number one, the climatic factors. The climatic factors, or you can say climatic agents. The climatic agents. Number two, the atmospheric factors, or you can say atmospheric agents. Atmospheric factors or atmospheric agents. Number three, I call it water factors. The water factors, or you can say the the hydrosphere or the hydrological factors. The hydrological factors, and then I have the topography. Topography, topography, that is number four, the topography, and then number five factors under the abiotic are the edaphic or the soil factors. The edaphic or the soil factors. The edaphic or the soil factors. So, for the sake of this lecture, these are five different categories of abiotic factors that affect an organism or ecological community of organisms in their environment. In their environment. Now, we need to briefly, in summary, look at some of these abiotic components and see how they can influence the form and the survival of organisms in their environment. We look at these different abiotic factors. Now, let's start with the climatic factors. Climatic factors. Let's start with the climatic factors. You know, climatic factors has to do with the different agents of climates, the different agents of climates, in an environment. Okay, the different agents of climate, and this include light, temperature, relative humidity, rainfall or snow. These are different climatic factors and so on. Now, um, let's start with the first factor under the climatic factor. The first factor, light. Light. We know by now and from my previous lecture that light, the ultimate source of light in the biosphere, the ultimate source of light in the biosphere is the sun. The sun is the ultimate source of light, and from our previous lectures in energy transfer, we have been able to establish that it is the producers that are able to trap the sunlight and convert it to organic molecules which is then passed on through the food chain to other organisms in the food chain or in the environment. So we see that light is very important, and I want to mention here that the sunlight actually drives most of the climatic factors. Yes, the sunlight drives most of the climatic factors. Okay, the sunlight drives most of the climatic factors. Now, there are some important um, characteristics or features of light that is important, that is needed for the survival of organisms in the environment. There are important features or characteristics of sunlight, of light in an environment that is needed for the survival of any organism. Okay, now what are these important features of light that is important? Three important features of light. Light intensity. Light intensity. Light intensity has to do with the degree of brightness or dullness of the available light in a particular place. Okay, light intensity. The quality of light is also very important. The quality of light is also very important. That has to do with the wavelength or the color of light that is available. And then the final characteristics of light that affect organism is the duration. The duration of light. I talk about intensity of light, the quality of light, and the duration of light. These three characteristics of light are important. We know that from photosynthesis, our knowledge of photosynthesis, we know that photosynthesis cannot take place in the absence of light. Photosynthesis cannot take place in the absence of light. Light is needed for photosynthesis to take place. And the amount of photosynthesis that is carried out depends on the intensity of light. Either you are talking about the terrestrial environment, the intensity of light affect primary production, or you are talking about aquatic environment, the intensity of light affect primary productivity. You know, especially in the aquatic environment, as um, in the aquatic environment, the intensity of light drops with depth. The intensity of light drops with the depth in the aquatic environment. As the light strikes the surface of the water, the intensity begins to reduce. That is why most producers organisms, the phytoplanktons and aquatic organisms, you always find them on the surface, because that is where they can thrive most. Their photosynthetic organisms at different level in an aquatic environment. However, the intensity of light that is available to them varies. Definitely, it means that there will be different organisms that can survive at different intensity of light. That is what makes them to survive at different levels they find themselves. But most producers in aquatic ecosystem, they are on the surface of the water. The phytoplanktons, the water plants, they are usually on the surface of the water. Now, the quality of light, this has to do with the wavelength and also the color, the wavelength of light and the color of light. These also affect production, primary productivity in nature, in the ecosystem. And then the duration of light. Longer period of availability of sunlight will make for more primary productivity. Shorter period of sunlight will make for less primary productivity. This is how light affects organisms in their environment. And now also, I want to mention that light intensity can be measured using an instrument called photometer. Photometer is the instrument used to measure light intensity. Light intensity can be measured with the instrument called photometer. Photometer is an instrument used to measure light intensity. So now, the next climatic factor is temperature. Temperature is the degree of hotness or coldness of a body. Temperature is the degree of hotness or coldness of a body. We know that. And Temperature, the source of temperature is heat from the sunlight. The ultimate source of temperature is heat from the sunlight also. So the sunlight, you see, temperature is also related to the sunlight. Temperature is also related to the sunlight. So in an ecosystem, or in the biosphere, the ultimate source of heat decides temperature. The ultimate source of heat is also the sun, is also the sunlight. I also want to mention that there could be another source of heat. There could be another source of heat, and that is the geothermal source of heat. The geothermal source of heat is also in the ecosphere. In the ecosphere, there's another source of heat apart from the sun, which is the geothermal heat. The geothermal source of heat, and that is the heat that is produced by from the earth crust. The heat that is produced from the earth crust, from mountain magma venting, in the mountain magma venting from beneath the earth crust. And geothermal source of heat is usually very important in hot springs, and in deep ocean vents. In deep ocean vents, geothermal source of heat, is the source of heat in hot springs and in deep ocean vents. In deep ocean vents. Now, how does temperature affect an organism in an habitat? Usually, organism usually survive. Different organism will usually survive within certain range of temperature, where they are metabolically and where they are metabolically stable, where they are metabolically active, or where they are metabolic and structurally adapted. So organism, human being, earthworm, mention it, will only survive within range of temperature that they are metabolically and structurally adapted. If the temperature range, if the temperature exceed the temperature range in which an organism can survive, usually such organism can die off. They will die of dehydration. So organism will normally survive within certain temperature range. Anything outside that temperature range, organism may die off. Organism may migrate from that environment, or may suffer death. So temperature is very important to organism in their environment. So, and usually temperature can be measured. Temperature can be what? Measured. You can measure the temperature of soil, you can measure the temperature of water, you can measure the temperature of the air. Temperature of soil, water and the air. And also you can measure the temperature of body or animal body using an instrument called mercury thermometer. Mercury thermometer can be used to measure the temperature of the soil, the air, or water body, or even animal body, including human being. You can use a mercury thermometer. However, in ecological studies, what is usually very important in ecological studies is the range of temperature in a particular place. The range of temperature in a particular place is what is usually very important in ecological studies. So, an ecologist will rather measure the range of temperature in a particular place than measuring a single temperature at a point in time. So an ecologist will rather measure the range of temperature. Okay, what in this environment, in Nigerian environment, for instance, or in the tropics, what is the range of temperature where human beings survive? Okay, human beings survive from, maybe as high as 40 degrees centigrade to as low as say in the tropics now, say to as low as say 18 degrees centigrade. As low as that, maybe human beings survive within that range. If you go to the temperate region, the temperature can be very cold. The temperature can even go to -4 degrees centigrade, or even much more lower in the temperate region, in the colder region. So an ecologist is more interested in measuring what is the lowest temperature for the day and what is the highest temperature for the day, or what is the lowest temperature um, in a season and what is the highest temperature in the same season. So to measure this, the range of temperature in a particular environment, ecologists normally use an instrument called minimum and maximum thermometer. Minimum and maximum thermometer, or you can say maximum and minimum thermometer. Maximum, minimum thermometer. The next climatic factor that affect organism or community of organism in their environment is relative humidity. Relative humidity. Okay, relative humidity. Relative humidity has to do with the amount of moisture content in the atmosphere. Relative humidity has to do with the amount of moisture content in the atmosphere. In some environment, the atmosphere will be humid, that is having high level of moisture content, whereas in some other environment, like in the arid region, in the arid region of the tropics, the atmosphere there is usually very dry, containing little or no moisture, always very dry. And this is also affected, this relative humidity is also affected by the amount of sunlight, amount of heat produced by sunlight. When there is high when there is when the atmospheric heat is high, you expect that the relative humidity will be very low or absent. And when the amount of heat produced by the sun is very low, you expect that the relative humidity will also be very high. When the sun is low, the heat produced by the sun is very low, the amount of water in the moisture content in the atmosphere can be very high for relative humidity, and this affects the survival of organism in that environment. So the instrument used to measure the relative humidity of the air is called hygrometer. It's called hygrometer. That is the instrument. Hygrometer is the instrument used to measure the relative humidity, the amount of moisture content in the air. The next climatic factor is rainfall or snow. Rainfall or snow. We know rainfall is the amount of precipitation, on the earth surface. Rainfall has to do with the amount of what precipitation on the earth surface, and we know rainfall affects the survival of organism. In fact, in the tropics, due to rainfall, there are two seasons in the tropics. There are two main seasons in the tropics. We have the wet season and the dry season. The wet season is actually decided by the amount of rainfall, while the dry season has to do with a period where there is little or no rainfall. So, and we know what happens to organisms in these two different seasons. During the rainy season, when there is high level of rainfall, we know a lot of plants grow and germinate. Whereas during the dry season, you see that plants desiccate, shed their leaves, and grasses dry out. You see that this abiotic factor affect the living components. And mind you, as it is affecting the plants, that are the producers, they are the producers. Also, they are involved in primary productivity in the ecosystem. It will also be affecting the amount of food that will be available to the primary consumers. So you see, it's a chain thing. As it affects the producers, it also affects the consumers. So rainfall is very, very important in the ecosystem. And the instrument used to measure the level of rainfall is called a rain gauge. Rain gauge is the instrument used to measure the amount of rainfall in a particular environment. Rain gauge is the instrument used to measure the amount of rainfall in a particular environment. You know, in the temperate region in Europe, they experience snow too. During they experience snow. Snow also affects the biotic community. It affects organism in the environment. you know it affects biotic community in the environment just as rain does. At some point in time, when there is too much snow, there will not be any form of primary productivity. When there is too much snow covering the whole land surface, it affects primary productivity. It also snow increase temperature. It will make the temperature to be so cold such that it is only few organisms or few plants that can survive, that will be seen. Those that can't survive will desiccate, and will remain so until summer comes again. So those are just some of the climatic factors. Now the next abiotic factor, they are the atmospheric factor. Atmospheric factors. Now what are these atmospheric factors? Atmospheric factors has to do with the gases, the movement of gases in the atmosphere. Um, and also the wind, movement of air, which is called wind. The movement of air, which is called wind, in the atmosphere. Now, what are some gases you find in the atmosphere that affect life, affect organisms? Gases include carbon dioxide gas, the oxygen gas, the nitrogen gas. All these gases, they are present in the atmosphere. Um, in the atmosphere, and there are other gases too. In the atmosphere apart from carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen gas. There are other gases too. Carbon monoxide in a polluted environment. Now, nitrogen gas is actually the most abundant gas in the atmosphere. It occupies about 78% in volume of the total gas. 78% in volume of the total gas in the atmosphere. Okay, so there are so many gases, and we know that these gases affect human being. The nitrogen gas that is in the atmosphere is needed for is needed by organisms, by plants and animals. And this nitrogen in the atmosphere is usually the inorganic nitrogen in the atmosphere is usually converted, or is usually, yes, made available through the process of nitrification. Nitrification, nitrogen fixation. These are some process through which the nitrogen in the atmosphere, nitrogen fixation, nitrification, putrefaction. These are some process that either convert the atmospheric nitrogen to useful organic nitrogen, or some factor that also convert it back to atmospheric nitrogen. So oxygen is important. We know we breathe oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. There is continuous exchange during respiration. There is continuous exchange of gas. We breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. This is needed for Oxygen is needed for cellular respiration. And both plants and animal take in oxygen and breathe out and give out carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is also needed by plants during the process of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide is needed by plants during the process of photosynthesis to manufacture organic molecule in the presence of sunlight. And then another factor under the atmospheric factor is the movement of air currents, which is called wind. movement of air current in the atmosphere, that is called wind. Wind action, wind pressure, wind current. Wind action, wind pressure, wind current, pressure, current, they are very important in deciding the atmospheric condition of any particular place. They even decide the seasonal, the weather system, the weather system of a place. The wind atmospheric, the wind current, wind pressure, they decide the weather system of a place. The movement of the wind, the movement of air decide the weather system of a place. The movement of air also affect relative humidity. If there is poor wind current, like when there is low wind, that can make the environment to become, wind can bring water moisture from the sea to the terrestrial environment, but in the absence of such, it can make such an environment to be too dry, and vice versa. It depends on where the wind current is coming from. If the wind current is coming from the sea, from the ocean, it will make the adjacent environment to be cool, and if the wind current is coming from the dry or arid environment, it will make the adjacent environment or the receiving environment to be dry. It will bring down the relative humidity. So here are some factors. And wind can be measured. There are two parameters can be measured for wind. The wind speed, the speed of the wind can be measured. The speed of the wind can be measured using an instrument called anemometer. Anemometer is an instrument for measuring wind speed. Anemometer. And also the wind direction. The direction of wind can be measured with another instrument called wind vane. Wind vane is an instrument for measuring the direction of wind. The next abiotic factor we are looking at is I call it the water factor, or you can call it the hydrological factor, which is the amount of water that is available, to organism. Based on the hydrological factor or water availability, the environment of organism can be divided into two types. We can have the aquatic environment, and we can have the terrestrial environment. Based on water availability, the environment of organism can be divided into the aquatic environment or aquatic habitat, and then the terrestrial environment or terrestrial habitat. This is actually based on water availability. We know the aquatic environment is the environment that is submerged in water, completely submerged in water, and organisms live completely in water in this aquatic environment. And the terrestrial environment has to do with life on land, where organisms, plants and animals alike, they live on the soil, they live in the land, on land. So that is the terrestrial environment based on water availability. Now, I still want to draw more on this water factor. Okay, based on water shortage tolerance, aquatic organisms, especially aquatic plants can be categorized into three. We have the three: xerophytes, mesophytes, and hydrophytes.